If you are a sports television watcher, chances are you've watched something that Jeff Proctor has been behind. He has been a star in Los Angeles. He currently is president of ProAngle Media, where he produces sporting events for all of these networks: ESPN Stadium, Pac-12 Network, Spectrum, the list goes on. He's had a really neat career, and we're going to highlight it on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor at Fox Sports Radio, do some tennis and volleyball, tennis with the USTA. So, Jeff, this is a lot of fun. We're going to highlight what makes you inspirational. And what I see from you over the course of your career is that you beam with positivity. And in a business where sometimes the business can take somebody over and they can get cynical or they can get jaded, I don't see that from you, Jeff. Why have you always been so optimistic over the course of your career?
Well, thank you, Bryan, first of all, and thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. But I subscribe to some very simple things, truly. And my kids hear my mantras all the time. My kids are now 26 and 23, so they're probably sick of hearing the stuff that I talk about. But to me, it's the kindergarten rules. I mean, it's show up on time, be nice to the people that you're working with, be excited about being there, and ultimately, good things end up happening when you behave that way. When I started, and we'll get into this, I suppose, but when I started, I was an American history and diplomacy major in college. I played college baseball and loved sports and thought that would be really cool. But the idea of a career in sports and in sports television, really, I had no idea how to go about doing it. And I ended up on my 23rd birthday, I ended up applying at Prime Ticket. I was already enrolled at Pepperdine Law School. I was going to go to law school, but I really didn't want to do it. My parents wanted me to do it, but I didn't. And I ended up applying for an internship at Prime Ticket and ended up getting it. To give you an idea of how little I knew about television and sports television, they told me I was going to be a PA on Laker games. And I went home and told all my friends I was going to be the public address announcer on Laker games. PA, for those of you who don't know, is a production assistant. You get the coffee for people. You do whatever you need to do. And I had friends who ended up starting as at that same kind of road that I did, being a production assistant. And I always use this example too. One of my friends, we were both asked to be a PA on a track and field event on a Friday night. And we were asked on a Friday morning. And I immediately said, absolutely, count me in. My friend said, I'm going to a party that night. And he didn't do it, and I did. And to me, it's so much about being in places where you create opportunities for yourself just by being there and being someone that people like to be around. It's the same advice that I give to my son today. It's like, be the first one there, be the last one to leave, and be excited about being there and be helpful. And it may come off as being optimistic or being excited about it, but I think it's got to be authentic, and it always has been, thankfully, because I've loved being around sports.
On top of your attitude that I hear from you, Jeff, what was it that Prime Ticket saw in you where they took a chance on somebody that, like you said, didn't have that background?
I think I was a warm body. I think the world has changed dramatically from that time, which was 1989, which was a long time ago, where I was probably one of about 3 people that were vying for the position of being an intern and therefore getting the chance to be a production assistant. And each of those 3 people that applied got the opportunity to do it. Today, the world is different. I mean, that same job would have 500 people vying for the chance to be interviewed for that. It's just far more competitive than it was back then. But in terms of the reason maybe I got that opportunity, I think it comes down to the same things that I just described. And that is you're excited, you're happy to be there. My resume, such that it was at the time, at least I went to a decent enough college that I didn't come across as being an idiot. And having played college baseball, I think I came across as someone who might know something about sports. And thankfully, given the opportunity, I worked as hard as the person next to me and was then given more opportunities.
That college you're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, is Georgetown, right? And so that ranks up pretty high when it comes to the hierarchy. I know you didn't mention the school, but let's just mention it because that is one of the best. And so you go from getting those early opportunities to building up this momentum in the business. And when did you feel like, Jeff, that your career was really starting to take off?
I don't know that I did. I mean, I certainly got a lot of opportunity really young. And it again, you go back to crediting things that I'm sorry, I'm certainly not the one who's responsible for. It's all about the opportunities that were given to me by people who saw something in me that maybe I didn't see in myself. There are people that I credit to this day, and Pat McClanahan, who was the first producer that really allowed me to do things with him. If he called me tomorrow and said, "Would you climb Mount Kilimanjaro?" The answer is yes, just because he's been that big of an influence on my career. And he kept being an influence on my career. Gary Garcia, who was an executive producer at Fox when I was there, gave me opportunities and kind of took care of me in a way that others did as well. Sue Stratton, who was the longtime producer and director of Lakers basketball at KCAL, gave me my first producing job. I was a graphics coordinator and associate director at Prime Ticket at the time, and she called me over to KCAL, and I didn't know why. And she gave me a tour of the facility, introduced me to the general manager, and told me all about what they were doing on Lakers. And I knew her very little, but I worked with her on a couple of shows. And when we got to the end of the conversation, she said, "So what do you think?" I said, "Looks great." She goes, "Well, do you want to be the producer of the Lakers pregame show?" And I think I was 25 at the time. And it was not only shocking to me, it was something that I hadn't thought about at all. But again, it gets back to people giving you those opportunities. Hopefully I earned them, but somebody saw something in me. And in this case, it was Susan who saw something in me and allowed me the chance to go out and produce my first show at a relatively young age. So I would say that was probably the biggest thing for me early, was being given the chance to be a producer. And then, so I left Prime Ticket to go to KCAL. And then 2 years later, Pat McClanahan, whom I just spoke about, hired me back as a staff producer at what was then, I think, called Prime Sports. And, again, getting opportunities, coming back to Prime Sports with the resume that showed that I was a producer at that point, I think it would have been a little bit more difficult to continue a rise as an intern production assistant without going somewhere else to come back, because by coming back, people saw me in a different light. The same producers that I had gone and gotten coffee for now were treating me a little bit differently, because I had had some other experiences.
Jeff Proctor is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. So you said that before you saw what you had as far as your talent, others did, and that helped propel your career. When did you finally come to the realization that you were worth it? All along, you had it in you. And when did that moment strike? Perhaps it was a little bit later on than when some of your colleagues saw it in you.
I don't know that look, there are times I think where you sit there and go, "Oh my gosh, do I really know what I'm doing?" I think, I think that faces all of us. I'd like to think that I'm at least a decent person who is relatively smart and can make decisions that are hopefully motivated by good, as opposed to, just kind of being capricious. But yeah, to me, I think, fear of change is a big thing, I think, for a lot of us. And I got the opportunity to do a bunch of different things, and each time you have to kind of figure it out. And it's what I think about being a producer in sports television. I'm dealing with a couple of people now who I'm putting in different roles, doing different kinds of shows. And I'm a huge believer in what Pat McClanahan always talked to me about. And that is that our job is not necessarily being a producer. It's not necessarily being an executive producer. It's not necessarily being someone in charge of budgets. It's basically being a problem solver. And those problem solving skills end up manifesting themselves in so many ways outside of television or producing or whatever else. It's dealing with people well, and trying to figure out with relationships, which I also think are such a big part of it. My wife used to get mad at me when I was executive producer at Fox Sports West. We were responsible for about 1,500 events. And that's, if you think about it, that's, 4 or 5 events a day, every day of the year. And you gotta know the people and the teams that you're dealing with. So I'd come home at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock and immediately turn on the television and watch a Ducks game or a Kings game or a Dodgers game or an Angels game or a Lakers game or a Clippers game or a college game. And my wife would be like, "God, haven't you had enough sports today? Do you really need to be watching this game?" And my answer was yes, because if I showed up in the office the next morning and at 9:15 I get a call from the president of the Ducks, I want to be able to say, "Hey, congrats on that game last night. A 3-2 win in overtime. That's fantastic." I want to be able to know what I'm talking about and to be able to convey to the people that are my partners that what I that what they do is important to me as well, which is a little thing, I think, in the overall scheme of things. But I think it's a little thing that really can't be overstated. I think you need to let people know, whether it's people that work for you, whether it's people that work with you, or whether it's people that you hope to work with at some point, that what they are doing is just as important to you as anything else.
Yeah, that preparedness is everything as far as impressing your clients and making sure you are in their good graces. Jeff Proctor is with us, of course, president of ProAngle Media. I'm Bryan Fenley. So when you think about some of the biggest milestones of your career, when you really did brandish that problem solving gene you have, what are some specific moments where you really liked the way you handled situations and it worked out for the better for everyone?
It's funny, early in my career, I was just talking about how, being a production assistant, I needed to go to KCAL in order to come back to Fox. There was a producer that I worked with at Prime Ticket who still thought of me as a production assistant. And I told him one day, and I won't use his name, but I told him one day that I was hiring a producer to do a certain show. And he was an older guy, and he looked at me and scoffed and said, "I just don't know what you're doing. You don't really seem to know what you're doing." And he kind of laughed and walked away. And I was so upset with myself for not having handled it in a way that that I needed to shut him down. I felt as if I was being bullied, and I didn't react well to the bully. And it wasn't so much that he was treating me in a bad way, and anyone can treat me in a bad way, I really don't care. But in this case, he was treating the position of executive producer in a bad way, and that was his boss. And I really didn't like the way that I'd handled it. So thankfully, the same situation presented itself a week later when we were talking about something else, and he immediately made the same criticism of something that I had done. At which point I said, "Why do you think you have an input into this decision? And why are you criticizing?" And immediately shut him down. Wow. At which point he hemmed and hawed and frankly never criticized, at least to my face, never criticized anything to me for as long as I was in that position. And again, I think it's you have to be blunt, you have to be straightforward, you have to be honest, but you also can't tolerate someone who's going to be treating you in a bad way, because people are watching you. I mean, he could have, had I allowed that to continue, it would have diminished my authority to others. Sure. And I think that was always kind of a big lesson to me, is that you really need to stick up for yourself.
Yeah, stick up for yourself. You're a fair leader. And that leadership came across in a big way. 2015, the Special Olympics World Summer Games. Now, you might know her, Carol Stiff, formerly of ESPN. She was there for 31 years, and wow. She worked in programming and acquisitions and really big with that whole realm. And she just retired. But she said the 2015 Special Olympics World Summer Games, the most memorable, rewarding, meaningful experience of her career, and seeing what was pulled off. From your perspective, where does seeing that stand in your hierarchy of what you've done as someone who has put on so many events?
Well, both personally and professionally, and you bring up ESPN with the event. ESPN is amazing for their coverage of the Special Olympics World Games. It's not a moneymaker for them. It's not something that I think is going to attract a ton of viewership for them. And yet they did what they believed was right, and what I certainly believe is right, by putting extensive coverage of the World Games on their air. They were led by a guy named Bill Bonnell, who produces their college football game of the week, the biggest game every week. He was in charge of production, and fantastic, just an unbelievable group of people that were dealing with the games at ESPN. My role was, I was the senior vice president of broadcasting for the Special Olympics World Games. And I mentioned Pat McClanahan earlier. Pat, who had been my boss at both Prime Ticket and at KCAL, ended up becoming the president of the World Games. He brought the bid to Los Angeles, and then he oversaw the games, and he asked me to help him. And just as I'd said earlier that if he asked me to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, I would, he asked me to help him with the games, and it was an easy thing for me to do. I asked my partner here at ProAngle if he'd be okay with me kind of putting in 3 days a week at their offices while maintaining my role here at ProAngle. And he was able to allow me to accommodate that as well. But It was both personal and professional. I have a nephew who has Down syndrome. Pat has a daughter who has cystic fibrosis. I had worked on Special Olympics Southern California events for over a decade, having produced a number of 1-hour specials when I was at Prime Ticket, and knew and liked the people in the organization, going up to the late Rafer Johnson, who was fantastic. Bill Schumard, who led the organization here in Southern California, was a great guy to deal with as well. So being involved with that was an absolute blast. And then getting to meet so many incredible people, not only the athletes, the participants, the coaches, and the people involved in Special Olympics, but also the people from ESPN and the people that worked for the World Games. It was a labor of love in so many different ways. And I was lucky to be able to get my family involved too. My daughter worked for the games while she was there. My son volunteered, my wife volunteered, and it was a great family thing. And to see the culmination, it was the world's largest sporting event in 2015. And to see the kind of coordination and choreography that went into getting those games to work, was awesome. It was just great.
Jeff Proctor is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. You think about events like that, and here you are putting on an event, but when do you think that the gravity of the situation of an event has had that much of an emotional effect or impact on you? So like you're there for a job, and that is getting stuff on the air and overseeing things, but when has the content that you have covered on top of the 2015 Special Olympics, World Summer Games, where it moved you emotionally and the human element of you really was drawn to something inspiring from what you covered?
Yeah, it's funny. There are a bunch of different examples of that happening. I don't think anything would really compare to that, because one of the things that touched my daughter so much was she was dealing with an Israeli delegation, and I think it was an Egyptian delegation, and the athletes all came together, and you know, in the real world, you wouldn't necessarily see those two countries coming together, and yet at the World Games for Special Olympics, everyone was there to celebrate each other, and it really made an emotional connection to her. To me, the emotional stuff that I grew up really being interested in was the sporting side of stuff, right? So when the Lakers would win a championship and we'd cover a parade, to see the kind of reaction that people have. And now, you know, my son played baseball at the University of Georgia, and he's got some Georgia friends here. And while the World Series is going on with the Atlanta Braves, you know, that whole group of friends is living and dying on every pitch for the Braves. And to see the kind of impact that I've long ago kind of given up in terms of being a fan, to see just the effect that sports has on people, and to know that you can help be a part of it, I don't take it for granted at all. And it's so much fun to see that whether it's, you know, going back to Kirk Gibson hitting a home run in '88, or the Lakers winning with Kobe and Metta World Peace hitting a big three in their last championship against the Celtics a few years ago, and the Angels in 2002, or the Kings winning a Stanley Cup, or the Ducks winning 2 Stanley Cups. Those types of things, that the effect on the population is so cool, and to be able to be a part of that is something that doesn't get lost on me at all.
It brings another meaning of rewarding to what you're doing. We're joined by Jeff Proctor. I'm Bryan Fenley, and the transition for you to going to, you know, from KCAL and Prime Ticket now over to ProAngle, what do you think spawned that? What did you not have the opportunity to do that by building and growing this production company, it allowed you to do?
So again, I go back to the people that have allowed me to kind of do other things. I don't know that I had as much of a blueprint going into my career as maybe I should have in so many different ways. But, you know, Pat McClanahan, I keep coming back to that name, but he was so influential in practically everything that I've done in my career. And when I was at KCAL, KCBS, there were some budget cuts, budget issues going on. And ultimately, it was Pat who suggested to me that I start my own production company, and that KCAL and KCBS would just outsource their sports needs to me. So I got very lucky in that it was frankly, it was their idea and not mine. And it then did allow me to kind of do things without the bureaucracy of a Fox or a CBS, both of which I have nothing but complimentary things to say about. But it allowed me to kind of make my own decisions. And when the pandemic started, sports television kind of went away as sports all went away. And because we have our own company, it allowed me to do some things that allowed me to do a little bit more creative thinking. I ended up writing a novel during COVID. I ended up creating a game show that we're pitching right now. I ended up creating a food show that we're pitching right now, and then working on another show too that really don't have a whole lot to do with sports, but because I have this entity, it's allowed me the opportunity to kind of think in a different way that had I been at a Fox or a KCAL or a KCBS, I might have had a little bit more difficult time doing those things. So it kind of allows you to invent yourself in a way that you might not previously have thought about. I mean, going back to the beginning when ProAngle started, we were given the opportunity, my business partner and I, Steve Rangel, and I were given the Lakers and Dodgers broadcasting deals. So we had a 6-year deal to televise all of those games, to produce all of those games for KCAL. Well, when the Lakers and Dodgers started their own network, we needed to kind of pivot and evolve. And I give Steve all the credit for it because it was he who suggested that we build our own production trucks and go after kind of lesser events, quote unquote, lesser events, smaller events. And our production trucks allowed us to go do a lot more college sports, even some high school sports, some other things that previously we hadn't really thought about. And that's where our business turned. We do a lot of kind of not so many Dodgers and Lakers types of shows, but we do a lot of 4 to 6 to even 8 camera shows, whether it's college football, college basketball. We do the Chargers preseason games for KCBS. But we've changed our business models over the course of the last 16 years to evolve as the world and the landscape has evolved.
You've evolved as well in this COVID time, like you said, the novel and all these other shows. How many creative ideas have come from you sitting in the chair you're sitting in right now?
3. I think it was 3. No, I don't know. I mean, look, I think you're always thinking of different things. I am. I mean, I go back when I produced the Clippers games in 2002 at KCAL. The team was 15 and 67, but you try to get viewership. So some of the things we did were fairly, I don't want to say visionary, but innovative at the time. In that we tried to do in-game replays. After a dunk or something like that, we would go to a split screen and have the player bringing the ball up the court while we would have a replay of the last slam dunk, because oftentimes you don't have time to show that replay. Or we put a microphone on Darius Miles' mom with an earpiece in her ear so that she could talk to our talent, Ralph Lawler and Bill Walton at the time. We did an open outside of Staples Center where our announcers turned to the big monitor outside Staples Center where one of the players was on the court doing a talk-back interview with us. You try to think of different things that maybe haven't been done before, and doing things just in a different way. And so this spot right here, this is where I did a lot of the thinking for the novel that a partner of mine, Darren Treasure, and I ended up writing together, or thinking about the game shows or the food show or those types of things too. I think, to me, everybody has ideas. It's whether or not you act on them. And the novel was essentially written because we thought we had a good idea for a TV show, and it may turn into a TV show someday, who knows? But rather than just having the idea about it, we wanted to create something tangible. And that's where the book came in. Whether it ever becomes published as a book, who knows? But what it did was it allowed us to have something that tangibly talked about our idea or showed our idea, instead of just trying to relate to you and this audience or whomever else what we'd be talking about.
What is it like coordinating together and putting this book together? And then as far as structuring things and with the ideas flowing out, how did that test you in a way in this business, in a good way, that like it's never done before?
Yeah, look, writing is tough. I mean, it ended up being a 700-page novel that we ended up paring down to about 550. Wow. It's just kind of doing it. It's just forcing yourself to do it. Had I just been doing it myself, I might have gotten a third of the way through and then stopped doing it because it would have been tough to keep the motivation. But having a partner mandated that I hold up my end of the bargain. And when he got a chapter done, it was up to me to get the next one done. So I'd better get it done. It was tough, and he and I are not always like-minded when it comes to plot development or character development or things like that. So there's a lot of compromise, and a lot of making sure that we end up kind of ending up where we wanted to end up, as opposed to allowing someone to take it in a direction that we didn't want to take it. But so rewarding to have it done. I mean, the idea of, I think a lot of people talk about writing a book. A lot fewer actually do it. And the fact that we did it makes me pretty happy. Again, whether or not anybody ever reads it, it was awfully fun to put together.
Oh, people are going to read it. No question about it. Hey, hopefully, I'd love to get a signed copy if that's possible. I mean, I don't know. I mean, your autograph, I might, but I would I'd love to get a signed copy when that moment strikes. I want to leave you with this final question.
Yeah.
Jeff Proctor, president of ProAngle. I'm Bryan Fenley. So you've got all the successes of your career. Looking forward to getting that book out, everything you're doing in sports television. How do you celebrate your successes, Jeff?
I don't know that I do. I mean, I am so lucky that I have a great wife and great kids who my wife hears me tell this story all the time, but it's funny. The game show, which actually, we're pitching to a lot of people, and hopefully it ends up being something. But when I came home one day, I said, honey, I've got this idea for a game show. What do you think? She goes, that is the dumbest idea I've ever. So I am not surrounded by sycophants at all. I'm surrounded by people who will give me the honest opinion. And look, my hope is, and I've got really talented kids, and my wife's a lawyer. My son's an aspiring screenwriter. My daughter got her master's at the London School of Economics, and she's working in women, peace, and security issues. She's changing the world. So I'm hopeful, and I use them as kind of motivations, that at age 55, my best days are not behind me, and my best days are actually in front of me. So I am certainly not resting on any of the things that I've accomplished so far. I'm happy with what I've done, but I'm certainly critical of some of the things I've done as well, and I hope to learn from them and make myself better going forward.
Jeff, they're very proud of you, even if they are too honest. But
sometimes, do you mind calling them? Let me give you their number.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, that would be fantastic. And so, but what I hear from you is, from your wife and being honest, but transparency. That is a theme of your career. You are. It's very important for you, like you said, to communicate, stick up for yourself, and to work and be available when others, like you said at the beginning of your career, want to go to a party. No, my party is being at this sporting event. And when you have that passion, Jeff, this is why you've had all the success that you've had. Jeff Proctor, president of ProAngle. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. Jeff, this was so much fun. Thank you for taking some time out of your day.
Thanks, Bryan. It's my pleasure. It's always good to talk to you.